Marzinsky. I'm so happy to have this discussion with you because I discovered you a few months ago and I find your work absolutely tremendous and very courageous. Thank you for this interview on a subject that is rarely discussed in the Western medical world, actually. So, my first question, Jerry, you have made an observation that overturns all the benchmarks of Western psychiatric science. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is take a step back into what enabled this. And this is a crazy story, but it's very important. Matter of fact, it's the foundation of everything I've done. And what I was doing was reading the works of Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if you know who he
Yes, of
is.
course.
He's
Castaneda, yes.
okay. One of the things he said is that when the human mind is confronted with something that just doesn't fit the structure of the reality that's been created, that it's thrown out, you know, and it's not taken into account because it just doesn't fit in. It's kind of like what the Smithsonian's doing to these giant skeletons that they're finding, or the archaeologist finds that there was a very advanced civilization before man ever showed up on this planet. They just blot it out because it doesn't fit their theories. Okay, so I knew that happened according to Castaneda, but I had to see it for myself. So what I had to do was figure out some way to to check that out for myself because it was very important. I was seeing very strange things happening with psychotics at this big state hospital I was working in. And then I found out from my experience that if I didn't write those things down, after a month or two, I'd forget them. And I didn't want to forget them. They didn't fit into normal reality. They didn't fit into what I was taught in graduate school. They didn't fit into my everyday view of the world. So I'm like, how can I check this out? And I was agonizing over it for months. How can I check this out without getting thrown in jail? So what happened? I had one psychiatric patient who had graduated from the psychiatric rehab program that was at the state hospital, and he started his own barber business. So I stayed friends with him after he got out, and he was an ex-prisoner, and he wasn't clinically crazy, but he was crazy crazy. He wasn't hearing voices or anything like that, but he was very daring and he would take risks and that kind of stuff. So finally, I dreamt up a way to check this out, and what I had with me for Halloween, I had this Nazi uniform that I'd wear it on Halloween. It had riding boots, so it looked like jack boots. A friend of mine who was into World War II stuff actually sewed up a SS kind of tunic. Okay. And at that time, I had a replica MP40 Schmeitzer machine gun. It wasn't real, but it looked real. And if I got caught with it, it would have been hard to convince the police that it wasn't real. I mean, that was that real. I had a German helmet. I had, some swastikas. I had everything to make it look like I was a Nazi stormtrooper. Okay, but I'd only do this on Halloween. So a friend of mine, we were dating these two interns that were social work interns. So we had invited them out to the lake where we were going to have a barbecue one night, and it dawned on me. It says, "Okay, this is my chance. This is my chance." So what I did, I called James up, who was the ex-prisoner and ex-psychiatric patient, and they said, James, I want to test something out. It's very crazy, but you're the only one crazy enough that I know that would help me out with this, you know. And I don't want us getting thrown in jail, so I want to be very careful with this. So I explained to him. I said, you know, Castaneda says that if you see something that doesn't fit into abnormal reality, it gets thrown out. It's not considered anymore. It doesn't enter the memory. So I said, what I'd like to do is on the way to the lake this Saturday, there's a dirt road, a long dirt road. And I'd be driving it at sunset at night, near dusk. And I said, what I want you to do is, I want us to pick out a spot where you can hide behind these bushes. Okay? You put on this German Nazi uniform. And I have these two interns in the car. I said, well, what I'm going to do is stop right before these bushes. And I'm going to tell the girls, I said, hey, I saw something strange out there. I'm going to go check it out. I'll be right back. All right. So what I would do would disappear off to the left and then run back to the car as fast as I could. And soon as I disappeared to the left, James was to jump out of the bushes with this full Nazi uniform on, jack boots, swastika, German helmet, German machine gun. I mean, very clear it was a German stormtrooper. I mean, nobody could have missed it. And I told him, I said, I don't want you looking toward the car. I don't want you making any move toward the car. You just act like the car isn't there. The point of this isn't to scare them. It's to see what happens, what they do with this phenomena. I want you to walk very slowly. I'm going to turn on the high beams. I want you to walk very slowly across the high beams, across the road. Give me time to run through the bushes to get back to the car before you disappear onto the side, because I don't want them to have any time to get scared. Okay. He said, do not look at the car, just act like it's not there. Okay. So we went out to that place. We picked a spot, put a marker. James went out there maybe 45 minutes before I got there, hid his car so they couldn't see it, had the full Nazi uniform on. I pulled up in my car with the two girls, and I right at the spot where I said, okay, I'm going to stop the car, put the high beams on so there was no doubt that what they were seeing was well lit. So I stopped the car and I said, wow, I saw something strange out there. I'll be right back. You know, hold on, I'll be right back. I closed the door, took the keys so they didn't do anything crazy, you know. And I walked to the side of the road, and as soon as I disappeared into the darkness on the left side, James slowly walks out with his full Nazi uniform, slowly walks in front of the lights. And I'm running back toward the car, the back of the car, so their attention is distracted on him. And then I start toward the door and get to the door just as he finishes walking into the darkness on the other side of the road. So as soon as he finishes, I open the door, get back in, and I said, well, I guess I didn't see what I thought I saw, you know. And I didn't say anything. And then started the car and drove off.
And they didn't say anything. They didn't tell you, Jerry saw a Nazi walking around, no?
What's interesting was they both didn't say anything for a long time. Okay. So
Okay.
driving along, and they said, what do you think you saw? And I said, well, I thought I saw a tank, but there wasn't any tank out there. You know, there's nothing there. So just kept driving. They stayed quiet. They didn't say anything. And then one of them finally, after about 4 or 5 minutes, says, we saw a soldier. Okay, so here's the first great degradation. A Nazi soldier at night in the middle of nowhere made absolutely no sense. You know, there was nothing around. There was no army base around. There was no explanation for such a weird thing happening. So the first degradation was from a Nazi soldier, very clear, to a regular soldier. You know. So they said, we saw a soldier. And I said, what do you mean you saw a soldier? There's no army base near here. You know, well, what would a soldier be doing out here in the middle of the night? You know, and then they shut up, you know, and they didn't say anything until we got to Rick's house. Okay. And James drove back on his own, so they didn't know anything about that, and they just didn't say anything, nothing. They didn't mention it. And then I when we were eating, I said, Rick, it's been a strange night getting out here. I said, I stopped because I thought I saw something off in the bushes, and these girls said they saw a soldier. I was only gone for a couple of minutes. They said they saw a soldier. I said, is there an army base near here? Is there any military exercises? He said, no, there's nobody near here. Or I didn't say soldier. I said something strange. They saw something strange. And then I asked the girls, I said, tell Rick what you saw. And they said, we saw a hunter. Okay, so it went from Nazi soldier to soldier, then soldier to hunter. Okay, so the hunter made more sense, but it's the middle of nowhere. It's not hunting season. It's dark. What's a hunter doing out at night with no flashlight, walking around at night with a machine gun? So here's the next gradation: a hunter, from Nazi soldier to hunter. And then about a month later, as I was driving them, one of them to the airport, they were finished their internship. They were both in there with me, and I said, do you guys remember that night that we went out to the cookout with Rick? And I said, something strange happened. Do you guys realize what it was? And they couldn't remember it. So it was just as Castaneda said. Okay, so that was the basis. I'd seen it for myself. If you see something odd that doesn't make any sense, I would write it down because it would disappear from memory. Right. So that was the underpinnings of everything that I experienced from then on out working with psychotics, because there was a lot of strange things that happened working with those guys. And if I didn't write it down, I would forget it. Okay. So there were benchmarks.
Because your main observation is that the schizophrenic cases that you have worked with were affected by voice, of course, and you have found out through all many years of research that these voices were not coming from them. They were spiritual entities that were occupying their spirit. So you have recovered a lot of patients by helping them to realize that they were not the voices within them. So can you tell us more about these entities and how do they get into the minds of the patients?
Okay. Okay, so they get into the mind of the patient. The number one way is by trauma. Severe physical, emotional, sexual abuse and trauma. So what's going on right now on the planet with all this sex trafficking, this sex abuse, this child trafficking, that stuff is destroying the victims. I mean, it's absolutely destroying them. I mean, it causes massive psychological damage. And the United States is one of the biggest friggin', traffickers on the planet right now. The friggin' Congress is bought up by these drug traffickers and sex traffickers, the Epstein. Look at what they did. I mean, that wasn't Epstein they took out of that prison. It wasn't any accident that all those video cameras all crashed at the same time.
Yeah, of course.
That's bullcrap. The picture they have of the person they were wheeling out, they have a good picture of his earlobe, doesn't look anything like Epstein's. So these scum went in there, got rid of Epstein somehow, Don't know if that wasn't his body they took out of there. Okay? So
Yeah.
these people are perpetuating this destruction of these poor people. Right?
And also
So,
fears, I guess. Fears through propaganda, media sharing extremely anxious news. Fears is also a gate for them to penetrate the spirit, bringing fears into
well,
the people.
yes, they feed on fear.
Okay.
They feed on negativity. So what I don't know about over there in Switzerland or France, but here the television is full of all kinds of violence.
Yeah, of course.
It's
Yeah.
war stories and murder mysteries and these sickening stories that the news puts out about people who were murdered and tortured. I mean, it's just full of that feeds them. That's their food. That's what they eat. These violent video games, they should be outlawed. They're thinking they're harmless. They are not harmless. Another way that they get in is with meth, amphetamine. Amphetamines open these people up like no other drug I have ever seen. Okay. The prison was full of people who started using amphetamines and went psychotic. Okay. So the way that would happen was, they'd take the amphetamine, they'd feel like Superman, that made them feel good, it made them feel powerful, they got a lot of stuff done. And then they started hearing voices.
Okay.
Yeah. And they go, oh, well, that's just a hallucination. When I come down, it'll go away. And it did. So that convinced them it was a hallucination and that they can continue doing this thing. And then when they came back, it was, oh yeah, that's just a hallucination. It'll disappear when I sober up. Then one day, maybe after 15, 20, 50 times, the voices don't go away. When they sober up, they're still there. Mm-hmm. And it's a nasty surprise for the people who are using meth. And they're just as crazy as anybody in the psychiatric hospital after that.
But Jerry,
another way to get in is by Ouija board. Those Ouija boards aren't toys. They're very dangerous. I've spoken to patients who they were talking to. You don't know who you're talking to. On there. And these voices are consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. And I had one patient where they told him they were tormenting him to death. And they told him, if you gouge out your eye, okay, we'll go away and we'll never come back. So he gouges out his eye. They return right away and they start mocking him and laughing at him. Said, you fool, look what you did. You trusted us. Now you're gouged for life. Now you're freak for the rest of your life. People won't want to be around you. You're going to freak everybody out. Look how stupid you are. That's what these things are. They're very nasty.
Why are there particularly malevolent? Why these intentions of these entities are so bad and negative? Why do they try to destroy the patient or the people they are infiltrating?
Well, first of all, they hate the human race.
Okay.
They can't stand us for some reason. I don't know why, but they actually hate us. They treat us like cattle. Mm-hmm. And so we are their food source. So they're doing to us what we do to cattle. You take the milk cows out and put them in the pasture. They eat grass. They produce milk. Okay, we milk them and then put them back out in the pasture again, and then bring them back in, milk them again. That's exactly what these things are doing to us. What they feed off of is negative emotional energy. That's their food. So the more miserable they can make you, the more fearful they can make you, the more guilty and shameful they can make you, the more food they get. Okay? So if they can come in and take you over and make you think that those thoughts coming into your head belong to you, and then they can make you act on them, you're going to get in trouble. And then that trouble is going to generate more negative emotional energy.
Why do they need the human race to be fed from? Are they disconnected from the divine source, or why do they have to feed themselves from our negative energy?
Well, for one, we're the only ones that think. Okay, animals don't think. They don't reason. They don't have thoughts. They have instincts and feelings. Okay, so you watch a lion attack a gazelle, and he's got his claws in the gazelle, and the gazelle's fearing for its life. I mean, and it breaks loose, and then you watch it. 15 minutes later, it's away from the lion. It looks around. The lion's nowhere in sight, and it just goes back to the way it was. It doesn't become neurotic. It doesn't. It's not like, oh, the lion's hiding around the corner. He's behind those bushes. He's going to get me. And he doesn't see the lion around, and he's living in the now. So now the lion isn't around, so he's not worried about it. Now, if he sees one, there's going to be a reaction, of course, but he doesn't keep remunerating about it like humans do. Humans, it's like, oh no, I said the wrong thing at a party. Oh, what are they going to think? Oh man, I really screwed up. Or, yeah, I really messed up this time and at work, and now this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and then you start worrying about it over and over and over again. These things love that. They'll come in and they'll pour gasoline on the fire and go, yeah, you really did screw up. You really messed up that time. Now all this stuff is going to happen. So they want to generate that negative emotional energy because that's what they feed off of.
Because
And they'll
they
tell
don't have sorry, Jerry, is this because they don't have the direct access to God? For those who believe in God, doesn't mean that they don't have the connection to God, so that they have to feed themselves with human energy?
well, yeah, they're not getting any, all life, I think, comes from God. Okay. And you look at the universe, it's a dualistic universe. It's like, there's black, there's white, there's hot, there's cold, there's, you everything is kind of, there's opposites.
Yeah.
The whole universe is dualistic. So you have good and you have bad, these things. So they were created by God, but they hate God. They hate Jesus. They hate religion. They hate preachers. They hate the human race. And they're not being fed, by God. I mean, he kind of gives them life, but they have to, in order to get stronger, they have to feed off of us. They can't feed off of animals because they can't generate guilt. They can't generate shame in animals. Okay? So it's got to be us. And you think like in the United States, there's 50,000 people a year commit suicide. Okay? They don't do that by just impulsively one day getting up and just going boom without thinking about it. Okay? These things are coming in there and they're telling them, you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody likes you, you're a drain on everybody, your life is miserable. Why don't you just end it? Okay?
But at the end, what is their goal? What is their aim? Okay, they want to feed themselves from human low vibrations and energy. But why are they seeking to dominate humankind? Do they have an agenda? Do they have a goal behaving such?
Well, they want to make us as miserable as they possibly can. And if they can, kill us. So you look at the 50,000 people a year here, that's just in the United States. And a massive number of them are on antidepressant drugs. They're on antipsychotic drugs. That doesn't stop them from killing themselves. It doesn't cure anything. And these drug companies are making billions of dollars on selling antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. I think it's 14, well, I think for antidepressants right now, it's about $15 billion a year. And it doesn't cure anything. And antipsychotic drugs is $14 billion a year, worldwide. So they're making a fortune off these things, and they're not curing anything. It's just treating symptoms. So you think, why would these voices want somebody to kill themselves if they're feeding off of their negative energy? Okay? So they feed off that negative energy for a long time. You know, people don't just, for the most part, just come to the conclude, well, I'm going to kill myself, just boom, and just do it. They think about it for a long, long time. Or it crosses their mind for a long, long time. So when they kill themselves, the entire family suffers. You know, the kids, the wife, the relatives, they all suffer. And what did I do? What could I have done? Why did he do that? I mean, so here you have a whole family suffering now instead of just one person. And then you look at what's happening in friggin' Ukraine right now. You know, they lost that war a long time ago. What they're doing is totally irrational. That surge into Kursk, no military value whatsoever. It was completely political. So here's 15,000 soldiers lost their lives for this political sham that served no military objective at all.
Absolutely.
Nothing, you know. And over 600,000 are dead now. And how many hundreds of thousands are suffering with wounds and hands blown off and all this suffering?
The same in Gaza, the same in
Same
Palestine.
in Gaza, yeah. So you got these crazy idiots in Washington who are the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
You know, who's running the U.S. right now? It's not Biden. Biden's a geriatric nutcase. He can't even keep his pants clean. You know, and this is the person they're pushing to be president. You know, and here's all these morons that are voting for him, and Kamala Harris, who's a shoo-in. She's a puppet. You know?
Do you
So
think
it's the deep state that's controlling the United States right now. The military-industrial complex, big pharma, the Jewish lobby. I mean, there is no real president here right now.
do you think there is a connection, a link between these astral negative entities and the deep state, or they're connected?
Oh yeah, I believe there is.
Okay.
Now, you look at what they're doing. You know, here they're sacrificing an entire generation. You know, and said, "Oh, we'll send you these weapons. We'll send, well, you just fight. We'll send you these weapons." So they send the weapons, and these people are getting slaughtered. You know, they don't have the soldiers to use the weapons right now, and they're still sending the weapons. And who's paying for those weapons? You know, they're printing money, and the U.S. taxpayers. And I'll tell you what, the majority of people here in the United States are against this war, but they don't control this country. It's these jerks up in Washington, these satanic deep state goons that are making the decisions.
It's good to hear a voice of America like yours, not complying with the political decisions that they will make.
There's a lot of us over here. As a matter of fact, I believe it's the majority over here don't agree with that war. They don't agree with the genocide that's going on in Israel right now. They don't agree with sending weapons of mass destruction. And here's these morons trying to start World War III. You know, they're sending it's not the Ukrainians that are firing those missiles. It's U.S. contractors.
Right, U.S. contractors, NATO.
NATO contractors, you know, they are the ones shooting these missiles. The Ukrainians have no idea how to set up a missile like that. That information is coming from satellites in space. Those missiles have to be programmed. They can't do that, and Putin knows it. You know, so Putin says, "Okay, you keep sending missiles into Russia like that. It's World War III. It's on. We're going to start blowing up your bases. We're going to start blowing up your airfields." You know, it's World War III. It's on. You're attacking us. We know NATO is doing that. We've blown up several bunkers with NATO generals in them now. The last one, there were 500 soldiers in there. NATO generals and high officers, they hit it with one of those hypersonic missiles, and it was deep underground, and they blew the crap out of it anyway. So they're finding all these bioweapons labs on the border with Russia. That's all deep state CIA crap, you know. And laundering money. They're laundering money through Ukraine. Ukraine's one of the most corrupt countries on the planet.
Jerry,
And
yeah, just to go back to your field of research and practice, in the mental health world. You have cured a lot of patients by, for instance, encouraging them to listen Amazing Grace, to meditate the song Amazing Grace, for instance. You also encourage them to make some meditations, to pray, and also to pronounce the Psalm 23 from the Bible. Can you tell me more about this, and what would you witness through your own suggestion of curing themselves from these voices?
Okay, so what I started doing is when I started investigating what these voices were telling these patients,
Yeah.
and it turned out that there were patterns that started coming out. The first pattern was they were completely negative. They wouldn't say anything good. They would tell a patient, "You're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody likes you. Kill yourself. You're a screw up. You're never going to amount to anything." It was all negative junk, all of it. And if they said anything positive, it was only to come around behind the guy later once they got his trust and then stab him in the back. So I was thinking, like, okay, if these are hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says they are, then they should be random. They should be all over the place. They should be positive. They should be neutral. They should be negative. They should run the gamut, just like hallucination. And working in the hospitals and in the emergency rooms, I've seen plenty of hallucinations. They don't match what the schizophrenics are hearing. Okay. So the first question that popped into my mind is, why are they consistently negative? Why aren't they random like real hallucinations? What holds them on that negative path? How come they don't stray from it? How come they don't bleed over? How come sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, and everything no, there wasn't any in between. It was consistently negative, all the time. And it's like, question was, what holds them on this negative path? So I started doubting what the psychiatric mafia was putting out and teaching in medical schools, in psychiatry, in psychology. It's, hallucinations don't run patterns. Now, these morons haven't done any research into the voices at all. None. They just went like the Egyptian priests of old, we hereby pronounce, because we're psychiatrists, that these voices are hallucinations because that's what they look like. So they must be, like they didn't do any research into that. They didn't do any research into the patterns. They just pronounce, So more patterns started showing up. Okay. The second one was the religion stuff. I had one guy come at once, a guy who's hearing voices. He said, when I pray the 23rd Psalm, the voices react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They can't stand it, And when I read the Bible, they hate it. They get louder. So I did a little bit of research. I would bring all these schizophrenics that I had on my caseload in, and I asked them, when you go to church, what do your voices do? And they broke down into 3 different categories. If the voices were very weak, they would shut up when the person went into the church. If they were moderate strength, they would get louder. They didn't want the patient hearing what the preacher had to say. They would start mocking the preacher and making fun of him and making fun of the Bible and getting louder and louder so he couldn't concentrate on what they were saying. If they were very strong, they would actually drive the guy out of church. He would get up and he would run out the aisle, out the door. And that was interviewing scores of schizophrenics that broke into those 3 categories. So you go, after talking to hundreds of schizophrenics and all saying the same thing, the voices hate God, they hate Jesus, they hate the Bible, they hate preachers, they hate churches. The next question was, why would a hallucination hate religion? And what kind of hallucination would consistently move against religion and the Bible and God and Jesus? What's with that?
Why do they react especially to the Psalm 23? according to you? Why do they hate especially the Psalm 23?
Well, because it basically is turning, the person is turning themselves over to God,
Ah,
saying, starts out with the Lord is my shepherd.
that's
All
right.
right. They hate that. They don't want that. They don't want anybody being the Lord's purview. I mean, so it was strange. So I started handing that out both at the state hospital to see what the reaction of the voices would be. You know, and I'd tell all of my schizophrenic patients what the voices do when you read this song. I said, every time they show up, read this. And the results were consistent. The voices reacted very negatively to that song. And when I was working at the prison, when the administration found out that I was handing that out, they jumped me. They
Oh, I
ordered
can
me to,
imagine.
you know, they said, we catch you again, we're going to write you up. Okay? So the prisons belong to the dark side. I mean, it's a very dark place.
But you
I felt like it. I felt like a spaceman when I walked in the door. You could feel the difference. So when you walk in, you can just feel it. You know, just the atmosphere in that place. Yeah, um, it's very negative. And Sherry, my co-author in the book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, she was transferring positive energy into a prison in Alabama. So she had all these Reiki people that got together as a group, and they all met at a certain time, and they would send that energy into this prison in Alabama. While she was doing that one night, this smoke started appearing out of nowhere, black, dark, dense smoke. And it came in and it said to her, these people are mine, butt out. You know,
but this
so
was what,
she
inside the building or outside the building?
she was at her home. She wasn't even in the prison.
Ah, I see. She
She
saw
was
it
hundreds of
inside.
miles away. Yeah, so they were psychically sending the energy into the prison. You know, and that's not the only time I've heard of black smoke appearing and then somebody speaking out of that black smoke. I think I've heard it 3 or 4 times now.
Mhm.
They say it doesn't look like smoke from fire. They say it looks more like when you pour food coloring in water, you know, and it starts bleeding through the water. They say it looks like that.
But it looks like that. Where
They
is it
can see
visible?
it right in front of them.
Ah, it's visible. It's much.
Visible right
Okay.
there, yeah. Yep,
Okay.
it's right there in front of them.
Okay. But then your patient told you that the voices get louder and stronger while they were praying or meditating, but finally they were chased or they have been expelled from their spirit since they have
Oh,
cured.
see, when I started off, I didn't know what these things were. I, I was in denial that they were separate entities until they came out and they started threatening me, you know, personally. I don't know if I told you that story.
Yes, I remember the story, but you can share it with us. Yeah.
So, the third one, let me tell you this. These were the first 3 patterns. Okay,
Yeah.
then I'll go into that story. The third pattern was when they attacked these people, their energy level dropped to nothing. They were energetically drained, and that happened to virtually all of them. So it was another pattern. Okay. Um, so here's 3 powerful patterns. So the patterns kept appearing, and then if you go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com and then go to articles, all 23 patterns are there. So anybody who's working with schizophrenics or has a schizophrenic son and daughter, you can see these patterns for yourself. They're not like, oh, it's genetics or it's a biochemical imbalance. These are lies put out by the psychiatric mafia that there's no evidence. As a matter of fact, they've been disproved at this point. So these people who are running the Western mental health system right now are just totally corrupt. They're just in it for the money. It's lie after lie after lie after lie. They've lied to the entire population of the West, and they've taken over the mental health system. You know, so they rule it. and they're making a fortune. That's all they're into. So as I saw more and more patterns appear, I started thinking, okay, what would happen if I started messing with those patterns and started short-circuiting them and screwing them up? So I would tell the patients to do the opposite of what the voices were telling. Okay, I saw that they were liars. They lied consistently. Okay, that it was constantly negative, and I would tell the patients they're not you. You know, they're these are patterns. These aren't hallucinations, and that, you know, they knew that. They knew that in their gut that they weren't hallucinations. So that's one thing that they have to overcome. They can't believe the lies that the psychiatric mafia is telling them, that these things are hallucinations. Most of them already know that they're not. You know, but psychiatry is telling them, oh, they're hallucinations, and the only thing you can do is take these toxic medications. That there's no other treatment for it. You know, it's a life sentence. You know, you're going to die with it. There's nothing else you can do. Another lie that they're telling these patients. It gives them a very hopeless, dark message. You know, that there is nothing. There's a lot you could do. So I started doing things to short circuit this. When I got to the prison, I had a group of prisoners who agreed to tell me in real time while we were talking when the voices appeared and what they were saying. Okay. Now that couldn't work at the state hospital because the psychiatrist threatened me for asking these patients what the voices were telling them in the state hospital. In the prison, they didn't care. You know, it's like that's the least of their worries in there. So I started designing stuff that would short circuit the voices and go against what they were telling these people. And then I'd give them homework to do that for a week, and I'd bring them back the next week and say, okay, what happened? And they would tell me what happened. And it started coming out, the voices don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't want us coming to these meetings. They're telling me all the way here, they're screaming, they didn't want me to come here. Okay. And all of them were saying that. And so that was the first thing. The voices didn't like being interfered with. They didn't like the patient reading the 23rd Psalm, doing prayers, calling them liars, you know, because they lie about everything. So then it went from there to one of my patients I worked with for about 6 months. He turns around in my doorway one day after we met. And he turns around and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And I never thought about it. You know, I went, well, the voices are stuck in his head, not mine. But I just sat there and looked at him. I'm going, and then he turns around and just walks off. He didn't give any explanation. And I just sat there and thought about that for a while. And I said, well, I better not forget that. You know, I'll put it back there in the storage bin. All right. So it was like a warning. And the third time this happened is a patient got into the medical unit. I don't even know how he got in there because he didn't have a pass. And he knocks on my door in the psychology department and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. That had never happened before. 20 years prior, it never happened. It was always the voices would tell the patient what to tell me, and I would tell the patient what to tell the voices. You know, so if we were arguing, it would go through the patient. They would never come out directly and speak to me. You know, so the patient was like the translator. You know, it's like when you translate this into French, you know,
Yeah.
same thing. So he said, the voices want to talk to you. And I said, they want to talk to me directly? He said, yeah, they want to talk to you directly. I said, okay, come on in, sit down, close the door. I sat down and I looked at him. I said, what do they have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life.
Oh.
And then he said, that was the voice that said that. It wasn't me. That was them. And I said, well, tell them this, you know. And he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can see you. They can hear you. You know.
Wow.
I don't have to tell them anything. So that blew me away too. Because
What
I
did
thought,
you reply, Jerry? What did you reply to them?
oh, it was something like, you know, you have no right to destroy these patients of mine. You know, what gives you the right to destroy these people? what gives you the right to ruin their lives? Kind of thing. And I was after that, I was in shock. It was like, up to that point, I was thinking, well, this is some facet of their psychotic mind. This is some brain malfunction or subconscious something or other. I didn't want to believe it. I had overwhelming evidence that these things were entities, but I just didn't want to believe it. But when that happened, my denial system just crashed.
Mm-hmm.
It just fell to pieces. And he turns around and he goes, "That wasn't me. I did not say that. That was them."
So this was the first step to healing, actually, by acknowledging that he was not the voices. That voice didn't come from, it was not part of him, of himself. So this was the first step to
He
recovery.
knew that, but I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
It was at this point that I realized, yeah, these things are separate entities. He already knew it.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Okay, okay.
So that's when it first dawned on me. It was very clear at that point that these are separate entities, that they can think, that they can reason, that they can speak, that they're not just figments of your imagination, and they're not hallucinations. I wasn't speaking to a hallucination. And I've carried on conversations with them through the patient
Mm-hmm.
many times.
Oh, wow.
But still, I wasn't. There was no direct contact like there was that day, and I was so shook up. I just closed my office and stared out the window for the rest of the day. It's like, what am I getting myself into? Where is this going?
Mm-hmm.
So that first patient warned me, "What you're doing is dangerous. These things come out, and it's another warning. You have no right to interfere with what we're doing." All right. And then several weeks later, uh, I was reading a book by a shaman, Miguel Ruiz, who said these things are they're parasites, they're energetic parasites. So he is saying the same thing that I was seeing in real life, and the patients would report, they all report after the voices hit them, their energy's gone, and I actually did a kind of a test on this, like a 1 to 10 scale. How much energy do you have before the voices come? How much energy do you have after they come? And I did this with scores of psychotic patients who were hearing the voices. There was a statistically significant difference between the two. They had much less energy after the voices attacked them.
But then, Jerry, finally, how did you succeed to heal your patient? So as we said before, by letting them listening Amazing Grace, by meditation, Psalm 23, and finally, because you said that the voice were getting louder when people were saying prayers, but then
Yes.
they escaped from their mind, or how did they
Well,
how did they how can we say how
basically, I didn't cure, Matt, I didn't cure any of them. Spirit did that. But what I was doing, it wasn't very efficient, and maybe a dozen fully recovered, totally recovered. But it was enough to show me that they could be gotten rid of, and that they didn't like what I was doing, and that if you kept that up. So basically what we were doing was starving them to death. If they turned to
how
God, they were starved, they were being starved to death. So if the patient realized that they weren't them, because the voices would tell them, I don't know how many prisoners asked them, "Who are you? What are you?" And the voices respond back, "We are you."
Mhm.
They wanted them to believe that they were them. So if they believed that, then they would start acting on what the voices were telling them to do. And if they did that, they got into more and more and more trouble. They become more and more disturbed.
But how
Okay.
then did you starve them?
How did I what?
How did you starve the entities? How your patient starved the entities by not being afraid anymore, by pushing them away, you know.
Well, what most people try to do is ignore them, but that doesn't work very well. You know,
I
because
guess ignoring
what
them.
what they do is they get louder when you ignore them. They will not be ignored. Okay. So the first thing they have to understand is that those voices are not who they are.
Okay.
Because, you know, from the time we're born, we hear this voice in our head chattering away, and we believe that every thought we have come into our mind belongs to us.
So by ignoring them, this is one thing.
Oh,
And
ignoring them doesn't work.
and
Okay.
sorry,
You need to know that it doesn't work.
it doesn't work.
They
Ignoring them doesn't
no, it
work.
doesn't
Ah,
not work, but it doesn't work well for the most part because
okay.
you're putting out energy to resist them. And
I I see.
what you resist persists. Okay. So you're actually giving them energy by ignoring them because it takes energy to ignore them. I'm not going to speak to them. I'm not going to give them any
I
energy. I'm
see.
not
Listen.
going to talk to them. So here you are struggling and they're there. Blah, 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 you're trying to
Okay.
ignore them, but you really can't. So it's frustrating.
So
So
then how to
that's a
stop?
losing. Okay. So the best thing you can do is you know that they're liars. They lie about everything. They make up lie after lie after lie. They don't care what it is, but you have to believe it in order for them to hook you. Okay.
Okay.
Now, this came from Sherry. Now, Sherry heard voices as a young woman. She beat them totally with knowing that they were consummate liars. You know, they lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. You can't believe anything they say. So what she did was like, that's a lie, you know, and then they tell her something, that's another lie, you know, you're a liar, you know, get out of here. So if you don't believe anything they say, they can't get their claws in you. You have to believe the lies they're telling you in order for them to take control.
Yeah, Jerry, this is I have understood that, but can you develop a bit more? Then what would be the solution? You know, because if there are some people listening at us now who has some voices, then what would you advise them to do? So, okay, not acknowledging the lies. This is one thing. Is there Are there
Well,
steps to do?
first, first of all, they have to realize it's not them.
Okay,
The
not
voices aren't who
okay.
they are. That's very important. They're not going to recover as long as they believe the psychiatric mafia's lies that these things are hallucinations.
Okay.
There's no way to recover with that because
Okay, what?
then if you believe it's you, there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, oh, I'm broken, and that's what psychiatry is telling them. You're broken. Your mind is broken. Yeah, all you can do is take these drugs. They're not broken. They're hearing voices. These voices are not who they are. They have to understand that. That's
And
the number one.
okay, and then listening to Amazing Grace, that does that do this calm the voice down?
Well, anything they see when I started off, I didn't know what these things were. So I would tell the patients, and I was working at the prison then. So if they got mad or they got upset, the prison is set up for that. You know, if they get pissed off. Now the state hospital wasn't. You know, in the prison there's guards all over the place. So if one of these guys start going off, they'll take care of it. Okay, so um, I would tell them to do the opposite of what these voices were telling them to do.
Okay. So for
So,
instance, go and kill yourself, then you'll go and do something good for you.
right,
Okay.
do the opposite of what they're telling them. 23rd Psalm, 91st Psalm, you know, so if they're going to recover and stay recovered, they have to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there. These things are demons. Okay?
Oh.
They hate God. They hate the human race. They hate Jesus. They hate the Bible. They hate the Quran. You know, and the Muslims are much more aware of these things than the Christians are. They have specific prayers against them. They understand that negative thoughts coming into their minds are not that not belong to them. They belong to the jinn. You know, they comprehend that. They already got that. See, the Christians don't. You know, it's like, oh, we'll just concentrate on God and Jesus and all this positive stuff. It's not the positive stuff that's causing the problems.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know,
but
how
we
many
have priests that we have exorcist priests. They do somehow the same thing, you know. They try to to chase the spirit, the bad spirit out of the body. Somehow it's the same, no?
Yeah, there are exorcists who can do that, but the thing is, the person has to increase their vibration. Okay, if they chase them out, it's just like the Bible said. You empty out the room, and if you don't fill it with good stuff,
Yeah,
then they will return
come back. Yeah.
much, not just back, but they will bring their friends with them. And
Ah,
I've seen that over and over and over again because one of the priests at the prison was an exorcist.
ah,
You know, and if the person doesn't turn onto a positive spiritual path and stay there, then they come back. Okay. And
see.
that's really upsetting because I saw a news report on YouTube the other day that scores of churches in France are being burned down all over the country. It looks like hundreds of them are being burned down. And nobody's doing anything about it. Look at the cathedral, Notre Dame. They burned that down. And there was a big yoga group over there. I think it was called Mesa. They have thousands of members. And their leader went from, I think, Romania to France, and he was working over there in France with they're yogis. They do meditation. They stand on their toes and they do all these different. They're godly people. They arrested him and charged him with child trafficking or something. They had no evidence. It's like this. This is like the third or fourth time they arrested him.
Mhm.
They don't want him proliferating this movement. They don't want a godly movement, so they lock him up and they won't let him out. And they don't have any proof. They still won't let him out.
But did you witness some patient who totally recover from having voices? Yes.
Yeah, that was really interesting. There was one I met. And the other thing, they have to have a desire to get rid of the voices.
Okay.
They have to want them gone. If they don't want them gone, there's nothing you can do about it.
All right.
This was another prisoner. He'd been locked up. He had a long, long criminal record. He wanted the voices gone. He was one of the guys in my group who he would tell me what the voices were saying. Okay? And he had a interesting story. I don't think I told you this one before. So one day the voices, he was in San Diego. His voices told him, we know where there's a Sesamelia pot field up in the mountains, and we can show you where it is. So the voices told him, he said, so he's in Southern California. He said they were, these pot fields were in Oregon. So we're talking 1,000 to 2,000 miles away. Okay. So they tell him, take all your money. He had, I think at that time, 200, 300 bucks. They said, get 2 burlap sacks and a machete, and we'll show you where it is. So he trusted them enough. He got in his car with his money, his burlap sacks, and they told him where to go every step of the way. So he's sitting there listening to the voices. He's driving that 1,000 or so miles. They tell him where to get off the highway. He drives toward the mountain, and then he gets on this dirt road. And, he's like, well, dirt road. And they're going, no, no worry, no worry. And just keep following it. So he follows it till the road dead ends. And he asked the voices, okay, no more road. What do I do now? They said, get your burlap sacks and get your machete. There's a hiking trail to your left. Just take that hiking trail and it'll take you right up to the field. Right? So he takes the hiking trail and he's walking on it for several hours. And then he comes to this giant Sesamelia pot field, just like they told him in San Diego. Huge pot field. So he fills up these burlap bags with marijuana, gets back in his car, and he goes, okay, what do I do now? And the voices said, well, we know where there's a park where you can sell it. So they tell him where to go to this park, and he starts selling this pot at this park. And he's making hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Right? And he bought all the alcohol he could use. He bought all the cocaine he could handle, and he bought all the prostitutes that he wanted. So he did that for about 2 weeks, and then this was really weird. Voices were fishermen, and when he told me that, I went, oh, come on. you're pulling my leg. He goes, no, they wanted to go fishing. He said he went and bought a fishing rod, and on the Columbia River, they would tell him where to fish, how long to stay there, what bait to use, and when to move to another spot. He said he was the only one on the river catching fish that day. He was catching one after another, and he's looking at all these other people not catching anything. So that was weird that he said they were fishermen. So after he ran out of money that first time, then he went up a second time, and he went and got more marijuana. And then he just continued that for another 2 weeks. When he ran out that time, he said, "Okay, I'm out of money. I'm out of marijuana. I gotta go get some more pot." The voices said, "No, don't do it. They're waiting for you up there. If you go up there, they'll kill you. They know you've been taking their pot. They're waiting for you. Don't do it. Take whatever money you have and drive back to San Diego." And he did. And so he was getting better and better. So that's one of the stories he told me after he fully recovered. So he was no longer psychotic when he told me that story.
But then how did he recovered?
He did the same thing to what I was telling you. He knew they were lies. He would call them liars. He read the 23rd Psalm. He read the Bible. He would pray to guardian angels. He would walk in nature. He'd do positive things. He'd watch he'd watch positive things. He'd watch inspiring movies. He'd read religious material. He'd stay away from everything negative. He wouldn't do anything the voices told him. And what was interesting is he had a mother who was deceased. So he was hearing her at the same time he was hearing the voices. So I was suspicious of her because sometimes they fake like they're a mother or God or Jesus or somebody like that. So I would always ask him, "Do you hear from your mother this week?" When I brought him, and I'd say, "Oh, what'd she tell you?" "Oh, she told me to wear clean underwear and to stay away from the gangsters and to don't use drugs and
this was positive.
kind of stuff a mother would say." So I'd say, "Did she ever tell you anything negative?" Because if she ever told him even one thing negative that would have been harmful to him, I would have immediately suspected that she was a voice faking like the mother. That never happened. It was always stay away from the gangsters, be good, listen to what Jerry's telling you, kind of thing. So finally, one day, the voices actually left. They were gone, and it was silence. And he hadn't heard silence in decades. And he tells me, they said, "Well, you're no fun anymore. We're going to go find somebody else." And they were gone. And then he said, "My mother wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Well, that's going to be interesting." So I closed the door. I said, "Well, what's your mom got to say?" And he goes, "My mom wants to thank you." She says, "Thank you for helping my son." And I said, "Well, you're more than welcome." I said, what do you, she was deceased by then. I asked her, I said, "What are you doing over there?" And she says, "I'm checking people in, and I went, like a secretary. And I asked her, I asked her another question, and she said, "I shouldn't be talking to you. Everything you need to know is in the Bible." And then she disappeared. And then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, he comes back and he goes, "I don't hear my mom anymore." So what was interesting is while he was hearing his mom, when the voices came, if they were weak voices, the mom would show up and she would fight with them. She would drive them off. But when the stronger voices came, he said that the mother left. So I found that interesting too.
But Jerry, doesn't mean that there are positive voices or positive entities that influence you, or all entities are dangerous and bullshit.
No. There's guardian angels. They're there. They don't speak in words most of the time, unless the person's on the verge of death. They won't speak in words. They speak in feelings and intuition and conscience. So you think about something. Hey, I'm going to shoplift this thing, and the guardian angel goes, "No, don't do that." Or I'm going to punch this guy in the mouth, and then thought comes in, feeling like, no, that's not right. So your conscience. Your conscience tells you not to do these things. Now, when I worked, the last 10 years I worked in the emergency room during psych crisis in emergency rooms. And it's there where I got to see the positive ones at work constantly, because all these people would come in and they would make a suicide attempt that it should have killed them. I mean, they shouldn't have been in front of me at that moment. They should have been dead. And this happened over and over and over. They did something that was so deadly that they shouldn't have survived it. You know, and I don't know if I told you the story with the woman in the train. Did I tell you that?
No, but just we have 10 minutes more, Jerry. So I don't know if it's we should go into that story because I would like to I still have three questions, maybe.
Okay, let's go there.
Yeah. So
We,
without
we
being
can go into stories in another time.
Yeah, maybe we will make a second interview later on.
Okay.
Next question, Jerry. Without being schizophrenic or mentally ill, we have little negative thoughts every day, right? How can you tell the difference between a spiritual attack from an entity and a self-destructive thought such as I'm ugly, I'm fat, I'm too old, I'm too bad, which is just coming from a lack of self-confidence.
There's two sources of those kind of thoughts. One are these negative energies, these negative beings. Okay, and one of the main ways to tell the difference between them and something else is their intention. The intention of that thought is to harm you or to bring you down. Okay, it's not your intention. It's nothing that you want to do. But it's telling you this stuff. All right. Now there's another factor that's also operating there. So when I was exploring all this stuff, I would do anything that worked. I don't care if it was dance on your head or stand on your head. If it worked, it had some effect on these things, I would use it. Now there's something else in there that we all have, and it's called a negative identity. Okay. It was created during a trauma. Okay? Everybody has traumas. So if you had an abusive mother or father, okay, and they were very abusive there, they caused that trauma. And that trauma was very painful. And then what happened is the ego, the trauma would just sit there and just torture you. Just sits there in that bad feeling. So the ego swoops in and goes, finally, hey, I'll handle this for you. I'll get rid of it. So it takes it and it buries it in the subconscious mind and then locks it down, but it's buried alive. Okay? And then it becomes what is called a negative identity. It's like a negative program. It turns into, and the way it feels is like, I'll say your dad was abusive to you. Okay. Every time you see somebody like your dad that reminds you of your dad, it will trigger this negative identity. And then all these negative thoughts would show up. Yeah, I feel bad. This is stupid. I'm stupid. Da, da, da. So this is like a mind virus or a mind, what do you call it? A computer virus. It's like a mind virus. Okay. The way it reacts is like when somebody shows up that reminds you of the person who abused you. Okay, that thing reacts and it throws that negative feeling out on the person in the environment. And it says, it's them that are making you feel bad. It's not me in here, this program, it's them. Drive them away, attack them, avoid them, run from them. It's them. Okay? But the problem is here because these people keep showing up over and over and over. The more they show up, the more you believe it's me. Because this happens every time these people show up, something's wrong with me, but you don't know what it is because it's subconscious. So Mace found that if you don't handle these negative identities, if you don't get rid of them, nothing changes. You can talk about how you feel forever, but if you don't go in there and you drain this negative identity, it stays active. Now, the problem he had in developing this Mesa energy method was that where did the subconscious bury this? It could be anywhere there. You never find it. So that's where he relies on the spiritual component of the human being the spirit. He's got to wait for the spirit to find this thing. Okay? And once it finds it, it can turn it into an image. Once it turns it into an image, you can then connect it to the spirit, and the spirit will absorb it because it's negative. Negative moves toward positive. That's the way energy flows. So John Mace was he wasn't a psychologist or a psychiatrist. He was a ship captain. He was a master mariner. So he had to know about magnetism. He had to know about how electricity flows. He had to know about, all this kind of stuff. So he developed both a scientific and a spiritual method. And as soon as I found that out, I went and got certified in it. And it works better than anything I have ever seen. It will go in there in an hour and it will get rid of these negative identities. And then they were gone forever. Boom, just like that. They're gone. So the negative entities, even if a person's hearing voices, you get rid of that garbage, they don't have as much stuff to feed off of. Right? And this works with virtually anybody. And what's so interesting about it is the therapist does not need to know what the trauma is. It works anyway, as long as you know what it is. It can be gotten rid of. So I've had hundreds of patients now that have completely recovered from psychological problems in an hour or two. Gone. It's gone forever. You're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, all this bad stuff their parents told them. It's gone. So you can go to my website and if you're interested, sign up there at jerrymarzinski.com.
Yeah, of course.
I'm kind of a month behind now, but if you're interested, I'll get you in there.
What is your most important message today to people who are listening to you? How can we get rid from these entities the best way? How can we protect ourselves from these entities according to you? What is your advice and your message?
Well, we are very powerful spirits. The voices don't want us to realize that. Okay? You can connect. Each one of us is a spark of God. Your life comes from God. Man hasn't been able to create life. So that you're connected to God. All of us are connected to God. Okay? So to realize that, and feel that God self within you and expand it, just connect with it and just feel it and expand it. And then you can put a light protection around yourself from these entities. Realize they're out there, realize they're destroying the planet right now. I mean, they are rampant right now. All these high up officials, these presidents, Macron, Trudeau, Biden, they're crawling with these things. What's his name? That Secretary of State that we have right now. He's another one that's crawling with these things. They're all eaten up by them. So stay away from negative stuff. Don't watch murder mysteries. Don't watch war stories. Don't watch negative stuff. Turn to God. Realize that you're a spark of God. That you have guardian angels. Everybody has two guardian angels watching over them. They can't help you unless you ask. Because they're not allowed to interfere with anything you do unless you give them permission. Now the dark side can. They can barge in and they can just take over. I got stories of where people have been completely taken over by them, and it's not pretty. Matter of fact, I could probably bring on a mother whose son was completely taken over by them. He murdered his girlfriend and cut her up into little pieces, and they still haven't found her body. He shot 4 other people in drug deals. He's locked up on a maximum security unit right now in Colorado. And she can tell you what it was like living with him.
But do you think that the force of lights will take over on the shadow in the future? Are you optimistic?
I'm optimistic that it eventually will, because the truth The light is the truth. And look at all the truth that's coming out now. Look at all these scumbags that are being exposed. Look at Epstein, who's been exposed. This, what's her name? That woman who was running these sex things with him. They just arrested a big sex trafficker in New York here. You know, they've exposed Obama of stealing the election. They've exposed that. They've exposed these scumbags in the Pentagon, these military industrial complex people who are getting rich. You know, they've exposed Trudeau. He was a child molester. He's been exposed.
So
you know,
this means that there is a awakening of the humanity. That's right.
yes, yes, you can see. You know, but they control the mainstream media, so you can't get your information from the mainstream media. It's all propaganda, all of it. ABC, BBC, all these, even you know, public broadcasting company here in the U.S. All the mainstream media are corrupt. They're all paid off by the deep state and these scumbags. And the people who believe that are the ones who are going to be dangerous. You know, they don't listen to anything. They're completely brainwashed by the mainstream media. Don't trust the mainstream media. They're not telling you the truth.
Right.
Anywhere. Not in France, not in Switzerland.
How do you, last question, and then we will end the interview. How do you distinguish truth from lie? How do you distinguish truth from lie?
Well, for me, what I get is a feeling.
A feeling, yeah.
So I trust it, you know, and that's kind of, I trusted that all along. You know, it's like, what book should I read? You know, so when I was reading Carlos Castaneda, when I was reading Swedenborg, I was being led. It's a feeling, you know, and then, you know, after working with prisoners for 18 years, you get a second sense for when they're lying. You know, you can feel it, you know. So if it doesn't make any sense, see, and what was happening for decades is all these politicians were getting in. You'd have Biden, and then you'd have Bush, and then you have the other Bush, and then you have Obama. Nothing was changing. Nothing was changing, and it was lie after lie after lie after lie. And then you saw that they were lying. You know, just like Trudeau is lying his ass off. You know, you got
who is inspiring for you? Who is inspired? I would like to end with the positive words. Who is for you today inspiring leaders or wise men or women? Who is inspiring you today?
One is William Baldwin. He's one of the cutting edge therapists that deal with voices. Okay, he's got all these methods to get rid of them. The one who's kind of led me to what these things were Emanuel Swedenborg. He's a Christian mystic. He lived some 700 years ago, or was it 300 years ago? 300 years ago in Sweden. Okay, his father was a preacher. He was one of the top scientists of his day. He was a psychic, you know, and at the age of 50, Christ appeared to him and said, okay, drop all that science stuff. I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. And I want you to go and meet the people there. I'm going to give you complete access so you can talk to demons, you can talk to angels, you can talk to the people who are there. Come back and write about it to the people on the planet. So what I saw, and what another clinical psychologist saw, who was working at a state hospital up in California, we were reading Swedenborg, and we saw that these evil spirits that he was talking about exactly matched what Swedenborg was writing about. The voices they were hearing were an exact match for these evil spirits. They would say the same thing, they would act in the same way. There was a one-to-one correspondence between these evil spirits and what Swedenborg was talking about. So this schizophrenia is not a physical illness, it's a spiritual illness, it's an energetic illness. Okay, what they're doing is like, if you got a magnet with a strong magnetic field, you can't see that field, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. For all practical purpose, it doesn't exist to your senses. You get a bottle of iron filings, you put it on that magnetic field. Now you can see it. Okay?
Mm.
These patterns that I've listed are the iron filings for schizophrenia. They are the operational definition of how these voices react, how the patterns they run. Okay? They are spiritual. They're energetic entities. So what psychiatry is doing is like getting psychiatric drugs and dumping them on a magnetic field and expecting that magnetic field to disappear. It's not going to happen. Those voices don't disappear with psychiatric drugs. They're drugging the brain. They're not drugging these spiritual, energetic entities that are tormenting people. They're just calming the person down. They're not treating the cause. They don't even know what the cause is.
Yeah.
They say it's a chemical brain imbalance, but that's been disproven, but they're still lying about it.
Jerry, just tell me one word to end with that these entities don't like to hear. One word that can chase them.
Well, there's no one word that can chase them. And that's not that easy. I'd say the 23rd Psalm and knowing they're liars.
Okay.
And the same thing with intrusive thoughts, even if they don't come from the entities, these negative entities. When you get an intrusive thought like, oh, well, you're stupid or you're ugly, just say that's a lie.
Okay. Okay.
Realize that not all thoughts coming into your mind belong to you. Many of them do not.
That's the main message, yes. Thank you very much, Jerry, for this very interesting discussion. And I wish you all the best for the coming months and keep safe and well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.